We are on the record at 9 a.m. and today is July 21st, 2020. This is the video deposition of Sheriff Mike Williams and the matter of Mayra Martinez versus Sheriff Mike Williams et al. Would counsel please identify themselves for the record, and the court reporter will swear in the witness.
John Phillips and Kirby Johnson for plaintiff.
Steve Powell for the City of Jacksonville.
Sean Granite for Vickery, Chastain, and Andres.
Mary Margaret Giannini for Vickery, Chastain, and Andres.
Paul Darajati on behalf of Borisade.
Can you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
You do swear.
Good morning, Sheriff.
Good morning.
Would you please state your name for the record?
Michael Williams.
Sheriff, when was the last, is it okay if I call you Sheriff?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Absolutely.
When was the last time that you had your deposition taken?
It would probably be a few years back, maybe as a director, I believe.
Okay.
With the Sheriff's Office.
When was the last time you had your deposition taken in a civil suit?
That may have been a civil case, so about the same time.
Okay. Just to refresh your recollection,
Yes, sir.
we're obviously dealing with a written record and we're dealing with this new thing, the
Correct.
mass. So court reporters have become great at reading lips. Now they can't. So just try to enunciate as best you can through the
Sure.
mask. Uh-huhs and uh-uhs, not that you're a Southern guy, don't do well, especially with a mask on. If I need to repeat a question or if it just didn't make sense, let me know. That's my responsibility. I know you got plenty of other things going on. Saw your press conference last night. Don't plan to take too long.
Yes, sir.
Okay? And first of all, thank you for what you do. What did you do to prepare for today?
So we had some discussions with Steve Powell and some discussions with the undersheriff
Okay.
about the incident a couple years back.
What did you and the I don't want to know about any attorney-client privilege.
Correct, sure.
But what did you and the undersheriff discuss?
Just the basic details of again, a very informal conversation of the event, as I recalled it, the basics of it, nothing
Okay.
nothing in particular.
What do you recall about the event or events?
So the event, as I speak about it, is the incident in Sallyport, the video. And so my first view of that was seeing the video. And I can't recall exactly where I saw it. May have been in the undersheriff's office, may have been jail video, Sallyport video, and the discussion with the undersheriff post, obviously watching the video.
Okay, and we'll get into a little bit more detail. But you're aware, so have you reviewed any videos within the last 3 months?
I have not.
You read any depositions?
No.
Okay. Reviewed any documentation whatsoever in the last 3 months on this case?
No, sir.
Help me and the jury and understand your educational background and progression through the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office.
So educational background, obviously graduated from high school here in Jacksonville, left here and joined the Air Force, Air National Guard, and then eventually received a bachelor's degree from Liberty University. And then while I was a police officer, that occurred. So I became a police officer in 1991. And got the bachelor's degree to be able to take the lieutenant's exam, took that, I can't remember the year, but was promoted eventually through the ranks to the rank of Director of Patrol and Enforcement. Retired from the agency at that point during the sheriff's campaign, and I retired to run for sheriff, and then ran for sheriff, was elected the first time in 2015 and re-elected in 2019.
Were you ever a chief or assistant chief?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, at every rank I served except for under sheriff.
Okay. I vaguely remember that from the campaign. How long were you a patrol officer? Ballpark, don't you know?
So from 1991 through, and I would include bike patrol time in that as well, so probably 91 through 96, about 5 years.
What sheriffs have you been under?
All except, well, McMillan, Nat Glover, Rutherford,
Okay.
3.
So obviously the sheriff is an elected position,
Correct.
right? is there, kind of a transfer of power between sheriffs? Did you sit down with Rutherford or is there a book that's handed down? What happens when you become sheriff?
So I can tell you that I can't speak to what happened prior to, I don't think there's a formal process to answer your
Right.
question. Because sometimes the people who get elected may not be close or may not have worked with the previous sheriff. So in this case, I did have an opportunity to work with Rutherford, being the Director of Patrol and Enforcement, being on his staff for a couple of years, and then being closer to him as a director, obviously, in the last couple of years. So that transfer of knowledge, so to speak, was kind of ongoing. But there's not really an official, formal, here you go. Here's the book of what you need to know, and that doesn't exist. And so you glean what you can, obviously, and from past sheriffs, and then move forward.
Okay. What is your role and function as sheriff of the Consolidated City of Jacksonville?
So, in a nutshell, the safety and security of the city, of the citizens of the city itself. That's very, simply put, but I think in a nutshell, that's it. And serve as the chief law enforcement officer of the city.
And I think we'd be here for hours, if not days, if we tried to encapsulate what all you do for the sheriff's office. But and certainly COVID and the GOP convention coming probably has a different agenda than what you would have had
Correct.
Last year.
Right.
But pre-COVID, pre-GOP convention, what does the sheriff do day to day?
So really it's about, sheriffs can do different things depending on where they are. And the sheriff in Jacksonville, the next sheriff may do things differently than I do. So obviously we have, through the selection of our staff members, picked people who we believe can fill roles and take duties and responsibilities away from me, because obviously I can't do it every day, everything every day. We pick priorities that we want to focus on. We have picked from the very beginning the priority of violent crime in the city. So I spend a significant amount of time, whether analyzing what did occur or talking about, new strategies to impact that. So crime strategies and sessions that we talk about a lot. There is a political side, as you can imagine, dealing with the city council, the mayor's office, to that obviously I am a part of. As it pertains to budgets and city policies and our policies that touch the city, touch city government. So there's a lot of that day to day, and then just a wide variety of, community engagement. I think it's important for us as a community or as an agency, to have the community involved in what we're doing, and that means it's important for me to be involved in that. So again, simply put, but in a nutshell, there's law enforcement work. There's the political side of the equation that you have to be involved in, and then a lot of community engagement.
When was the last time you slapped handcuffs on somebody?
A long time. So probably maybe as a lieutenant, sergeant or lieutenant. So it'd be a while.
Okay. What is your understanding of the term civil rights?
So again, simply put, I think the rights that are afforded to everybody through the Constitution.
Okay, and I'm going to ask the same question, and it might be the same answer, but that's fair. What's your understanding of the term constitutional rights?
Same.
Okay.
Rights afforded equally to everybody.
Are officers generally, but really all I care about for these questions is JSO, is the Constitution and constitutional rights taught in the academy?
Yes.
Is it taught day to day?
I don't know about day to day in terms of that framework, but the application of it is clearly discussed day to day.
Very good. Have you been involved, and I know we talked about what you've reviewed and not reviewed, but have you been involved in this case or its defense in the since it was filed?
No.
Okay. There was some discussion with Director Schmidt yesterday about kind of who handles what. Are you involved in settlement amounts of cases?
I'm not.
Susan?
I'm sorry, Sean Grant is on the phone.
No, he's not.
He's right there.
It's for me?
They said
You need to go off the record.
Sean.
Yeah, sure. We can go off.
Let me go off for a minute. Okay, I'm going to go off the record at 9:10. We are back on the record at 9:13.
I think I was headed into civil suits, and you're not involved with the amount cases settle for, reviewing cases, any of that?
No, sir.
Who does that?
Well, from our agency, depending on who OGC asks for, it could be, a variety of people. So typically the undersheriff may be involved in that, and there may be some other, maybe sometimes academy staff people, or maybe sometimes people in a certain area of expertise would be asked to weigh into conversations about a civil suit. Not so much the settlement part of it, but
Right.
just about being involved.
The facts and
Correct.
the defenses. So obviously JSO has an operating budget
Correct.
approved by the city.
Sure.
And do you know if claims against JSO comes out of your budget or the city budget, or how that works?
So, no, I don't know exactly how where the claims would be paid for. So, as you know, I think our city's unique in terms of my budget is assigned to me really, but it's just part of the bigger city budget because of consolidation. So I couldn't answer the question about
Okay.
where the settlements come from.
Fair enough. When was the last time you would have seen the videos?
During and around the time of the
Okay.
event occurring.
I've boiled the two incidents approximately to 2 minutes and 19 seconds. I'm going to
Okay.
show just to refresh your recollection.
Sure.
There's longer versions, but and my monitor is a little dirty. Can you see that okay?
I can.
If I can find my arrow again. There it is. Okay. I think I turned it a little early. We're at 1:42, sorry. What did you just review?
So the two videos that we assume I'm here to discuss that are relevant to the case.
Okay. Did you review those back in 2016 when this happened?
So I did. The Sallyport video is the one that I saw and that we really began the investigation on. I don't believe I saw the actual parking lot video till maybe days later. Could have been potentially even after we had arrested Borisade.
Okay.
Or Borisade.
How did that come to your attention that there was an incident in the PTDF or the Sallyport?
The undersheriff showed me the video.
Okay. And did you conduct any of the investigation at that time of this case?
I did not.
Okay. From your review then, recollection, your review now, in the Sally Port, was that a violation of JSO policy and procedure?
Yes.
Why?
So in terms of use of force, we're only allowed to use the amount of force necessary to overcome the resistance. So any force beyond that, it can be described as excessive, and there may be varying levels of that. That particular video to me showed not only a violation of excessive force, but a violation of law. And so you had a handcuffed female suspect, intoxicated, slightly built, but not a large combatant, so to speak. And so I thought the response was excessive, and the investigation obviously played that out that way as well.
Okay. What about the roles of the other officers? Any violations?
So I know we looked at those, and there's some analyzing of the video that occurred in terms of who could see what based on testimony and video angles and that type of thing. So, the officer moving up to intervene and talk to Borisade, and I do know that there was a corrections lieutenant weighed in and had rescue get involved in it. So those were looked at during the internal investigation. I'm not sure the outcome of those individual cases.
Are you aware if anybody but Officer Borisade was disciplined?
I do not. I'm not aware of their discipline.
The parking lot incident, was there a violation of JSO policy and procedure as you know it?
There's definitely something to review at that point. I think the difference in the two cases are you've got she was not restrained at that point, and that you did have two officers. Any action they took was prior to her being restrained, and was a response to her even being actively physically resistant. I think you look at those. You take that video, and were there no Sally Port video, I think you could look at that and certainly review that activity. But to me, there's a difference in the initial look at the video between those two.
Okay. And there was a third incident, are you aware, inside the corridor?
I am aware. I have not seen any video on that incident.
Okay. And we're not going to be really talking about that today. There's a 12-minute video, and the video is poor, but it's your prior statement on this from a press conference. I'm going to show you that.
Sure.
And that's the end of the video portion of today's deposition. Unless you asked to see something.
Is everybody here supposed to be here?
Is that you?
It is.
Sheriff, I know that the first thing that people want to know is we didn't hear from you yesterday. Right. When you saw that video, what did you think? Well, obviously it was inappropriate. We've set a level of professionalism in the agency that we're going to work to maintain. So responding to an incident like that the way we did, I think, sends a message, not only inside the organization, but to the community, that we don't tolerate that type of activity. And again, we've set that bar for professionalism, and we're going to work hard to make sure we all maintain that. Can you clarify for us, those who were standing around, I understand they weren't JSO officers, at least not all of them. Well, we're still looking at that. Not all of them were, and we're still looking into that, and that whole aspect of the investigation. Obviously, we dealt with the officer directly involved first, but that's part of the ongoing investigation that we continue to look at. So that was a CSO office. That's what it looked like to me, like one of those officers who I was wondering what would they be doing at the jail anyway. No, I'm not sure. I can't confirm because I don't know at this point who some of those other people were, what agencies they work for, but that'll be part of the investigation. And we'll release that as soon as we get to that. And can you talk about that second video that everybody has now? Because it looks just as bad. Right. I mean, we made our decision based on what we saw from the jail video. Obviously, that first video it gives me a lot of concern as well. And there is an investigation ongoing now surrounding the first video. So we're, again, looking at all this and being very proactive in addressing it and dealing with the officers involved.
Sheriff, you've asked the community to help you with crime in certain neighborhoods.
Right.
but people are watching this video and they're seeing your officer stand around a very obvious crime in your own house. So what do you say to the community when they're looking at that and they're not going to do it?
Well, I'll say this. I tell you, I think it's important to note that when we see the video, or when we saw the video, that we acted on it. I think it's important to note that officers in that area are the ones that brought that to our attention, that incident, to our attention, and we responded to it appropriately. And we are still looking into and digging into who those officers were that were standing around. Did they work for our agency? Do they not? The officers that were there, what vantage point were they at? Could they see everything that we can see on the video? So all that's under investigation. I think it's important that we look at all of that, and we are. So as soon as we dig into all that and get the details and really get to the bottom of that, we'll be able to talk about it more.
Let me ask you, is there a law enforcement standard, just kind of over the board, that says if you see something like that happening, you've got to step in and just say, let's take a step back and reevaluate?
I think more and more, absolutely, short answer to your question, I think more and more it's important for officers all around the country to do that, to really weigh in and respond. Listen, if something's illegal and something's not happening that's appropriate, everybody has a duty to step in and address it. You know, not just a supervisor, but a fellow officer to step in and address that, stop that behavior, and then report that behavior to the supervisor. So we talk that a lot and preach that a lot at JSO. So we want to make sure that that's happening.
Sheriff, just to clarify, yesterday JSO said, when asked about the officers or whoever they are standing around yesterday, witnessing a crime does not constitute a crime. Are you saying if they are JSO officers that it would have been okay for them to stand by it and just watch it?
No, absolutely not. And that statement didn't come from me. I can tell you this: if there are officers who are committing a crime and someone sees that, they have a duty to report that, a duty to intervene. All of that is in effect. So again, as we dig further into this over the next several days and weeks and determine who was involved and who saw what, then we can take action on officers if we need to, based on what we believe they saw at the scene.
So if they are JSO officers, action will be taken?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, if we determine that they were in a position to see the things that we can see on the video, and they work for us, and we decide that, look, there should have been a point where somebody intervened and they didn't, then that's a step that we can take to intervene and address it with those officers, absolutely.
Who else could they possibly be if they're not JSO officers in that holding area?
Well, there could be other law enforcement organizations that use our jail. So those officers could work for those other agencies and not work for me. So
what does your policymaking say
about
intervening? I mean, I've talked to former officers and current folks that say this is not just a duty, but an actual part of a policy.
Absolutely. I mean, you always have a duty to intervene, especially when it comes to the reporting of crime. So we're going to, that's part of when we have an incident like this, we look at this thing top to bottom to make sure the policy is clear for everybody, that we all understand it and it's written clearly enough that people are observing it, obviously. We'll take this opportunity as we finish the investigation to really use this as a teaching moment for many of the other officers in the agency that weren't involved. But again, talk about it openly inside the organization and set that expectation for all the officers that this is what we expect from you on the street every single day.
So can you clarify again, so that comment yesterday about you see a crime, you don't have to report it, so that you're saying that didn't come from JSO?
No, I did not say that. I don't know who that came from. It didn't come from me is what I said. So if an officer sees a crime, he absolutely has an obligation to intervene and to address that.
I know this is under investigation, but since we have that first video now, shouldn't that have been reported prior to that incident happening, that they had somebody that they had to beat, and shouldn't there have been a supervisor or somebody called, at least at that point, to the Sally Port?
Well, there's a lot of things that should have happened, and we are looking into whether or not they did happen or not. Use of force reports should be written, those type of things. Supervisors called. If certain things happen, so that's part of the investigation that we're looking at. At this point, I don't know. I mean, that's what we're looking at. So as we dig into it, we'll know more.
Sheriff, this officer was arrested in the past, yet he got hired at JSO. How does that happen?
Well, I can tell you that we look at all of those issues as we bring people on, and we have an event like this. We're going to look back and see where in the system, did we fail in the system, or is this when we were giving a guy an opportunity, maybe he made a dumb mistake years ago, and we were giving him an opportunity to correct that, or he did correct it, and we're giving him an opportunity for employment. But we'll look at that as well. Again, as we get through the nuts and bolts and the meat of this investigation, we'll look back and see, did we miss anything in the hiring practice? Did we miss anything in the process? Was anything skipped? And should he have never been hired in the first place? Again, a question that we'll not answer today, but we'll be able to answer at some point.
Can you tell me, this is sort of early in your term, and you're kind of trying to take these types of issues head on.
Sure.
You got to be frustrated because there's a lot of people in the community that say, how are we going to clean up certain areas of town if the House of JSO is behaving this way?
Sure. And look, that's fair, but I can tell you this is one officer, of over 1,600 that we have. And my gut tells me that these officers, 99% of them are out doing a good job for this community every single day. And when we see an officer do something like this, we have to respond quickly. We are accountable to the community for how these officers act. They are accountable for their actions. And I think to that person who would say that, I think you have to look at the fact that we responded the way we did, as quickly as we did, as transparently as we did, and we're going to continue to do that through this whole investigation. So you're right. I mean, we take these things very seriously, and we look to correct them as quickly as we can.
So you're saying it's not a black eye for the agency?
Oh, absolutely it's a black eye for the agency, but I think we can overcome it. I think the fact that we respond to it appropriately is important.
Did you talk to him? Have you talked to them? To the officer?
No, I did not. I did not speak to the officer.
What's the timeline on the investigation? When do you expect to be able to give some of these details?
Well, typically it could be a couple of weeks or a month, depending on what we uncover as we dig deeper into it. So as soon as we have more information, we'll be releasing and updating everybody on the investigation.
Is there a mugshot that's going to be released in this?
I don't know as of yet. We'll find out.
Is there a reason why it wouldn't?
No, there's no reason why it wouldn't. So, bring the officers.
Did he sign the waiver? Yeah. So we won't.
Yeah, it could be a public records issue. So.
How quickly did those other guys report what happened? Was it, minutes after it happened, or?
Well, that's what we're looking into now. I don't know the answer to that. So there should be, not necessarily minutes, but there's documentation that has to happen anytime you use force in the agency. So we should have written reports. Those reports are obviously all time-stamped and entered into our system. So we will know when they reported it. We will know what they said on those reports. All those reports should match the rest of the booking report. In other words, the documented facts in the case should all be the same. One thing about the truth is it never changes. So all of those things should be consistent, and that's what we're looking at.
In the dash cam video, the officer hit her approximately a dozen times before she got cuffed. What is appropriate to get someone cuffed if they're fighting? Now, they're not necessarily being violent, but they're fighting. Right. Where's the line?
Well, fighting is being violent, but I can tell you this. I think that we have our level is enough force to overcome the resistance. So as you look at a video like that, you look at what point could that officer overcome that resistance, and at what point has he crossed the line, being aggressive. Listen, sometimes you have to get aggressive with people. It's not inappropriate for officers to punch people at certain times, but obviously there's got to be a lot of factors in place for that to happen. And in that case, clearly I have concerns in watching that video, and that's part of that ongoing investigation.
So did he cross the line in the dash cam video?
Oh, I think he did. But again, the investigation we'll get into detail about that, and we'll be able to resolve that piece.
Has that dash cam person, that citizen, reached out to you guys and provided you with that video?
I think we have a copy. I'm not sure. And I don't know that we've had any interaction with the party that took the video. We would, as part of this investigation, want to reach out and talk to them, obviously. But I don't know that we have a copy of the video, and I don't know that we haven't, but I can't confirm that we've talked to that individual.
Important though to your investigation?
Oh, I think so, absolutely. I think it's important for them to weigh in.
Does it concern you from a timeline perspective that, if that is in fact the right officer and the right woman, and that happened before the Sally Port scene and whatnot, that there wouldn't have been a trigger between those two instances that, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think, to your point, I think should something have happened after the parking lot incident, and that's what we're looking at now. When did supervision know? When were the appropriate reports written? All of that would have maybe triggered an investigation on that incident without the dash cam video. So that's part of what we're looking at surrounding the parking lot incident.
So is this another incident that says and suggests that body cameras should be mandatory for JSO?
I think this is a good example of what a body cam can provide. So, and I've said before, look, I'm in favor of body cameras. We've got some serious budget issues in JSO. There are a lot of costs associated with the body camera program. The last thing I want to do is establish a camera program and, with just a few officers. I don't want to do that. I don't want to establish one that I have to, decommission a year later because I don't have any sustained funding to keep it going. So we've had conversations about that. We talked to the city about that, the mayor's office, about where the priorities are. But clearly as our budget, the budget ship writes itself, and we get in a better budget position, body cameras will be part of the equation. So, and I think a body camera in this instant, we've got a lot of camera footage. But it's good to see what camera footage can bring you. I still believe that we're going to get with body cameras 99.9% of the time. We're going to get a lot of good officers doing a lot of great work. And that other percentage, we need to see that anyway, so we can take action on like we did yesterday.
How do you say this? Yeah, that's
Good, it's a good question. Yeah.
Thank you. Some questions about that video.
Sure.
Anything that you would correct or you think you misspoke?
On that press conference, no.
Right.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely not.
You stand behind your statement at the press
Absolutely.
conference?
Objection to form. It's a long video, and a lot of material.
Fair enough. You indicated it was a teaching moment. What did you mean by that?
I think any time that you, even sometimes maybe just taking the action that we took in that case, can send a message to officers who may, be on the verge of, not doing things exactly the way they should be doing them. They'll know what kind of response that they'll get from that. So, and then it can turn into other actual teaching opportunities through the academy, roll call training. There's a lot of opportunity to be able to just speak to officers about the event.
There was a police academic or chief who said something to the effect of, and I'm paraphrasing, there's a percentage of officers that do it right every time and care. There's a percentage of officers that just don't for whatever reason. And then there's this middle bunch that's kind of guided by lessons. Is that a fair assessment of what you see in police departments?
No, I wouldn't agree with that. I think you've got a majority of officers who try to do the right thing every single day, all day, and I think you have a small percentage of officers who, sometimes don't make good decisions and get themselves in trouble. But I don't think that, there's a group in the middle that waffles. I think that most of the time, most police officers in our agency are trying to do the right thing every day.
What is your responsibility as sheriff to regulate the ones that aren't?
So I think it starts with, I'll start at selection. So the people that we pick to be police officers, that's incredibly important. So we have to select the right people, and there's an entire process, obviously, we go through to do that. And then you have to train them. So you get the right candidate, you train that individual in the academy environment through the field training program. We have an 11-month training program, which is, far exceeds a lot around the country, to make sure that we give them the tools they need to be able to do the job. And then once they leave the training environment, then you've got, supervision and policy that guide them. They're not off on an island by themselves. They've got guidance, as you move forward. So I think at that point is where through supervision and through discipline, you enforce those policies. And you have to, culturally, you have to have officers understand, especially in a large agency like ours, the policy means what the policy says. And so we have to make sure that, there's an active disciplinary process to make sure officers adhere to policy.
Are you familiar with the case of Tim James or the cases of Tim James?
A few of them, I am.
Would you agree that that he was a black eye to JSO?
He had some challenges, no doubt about it.
Okay. Multiple uses of force on multiple people.
Objection to form.
Are you aware of that?
I don't know his use of force record.
Okay. Are you aware of his Facebook posting record?
I remember that, I do.
Okay. Would he be part of that other percentage, the less than reputable percentage?
Objection to form.
I would say this, I think you have officers who make mistakes, and discipline sometimes corrects that. So you may have officers that violate policy, they get disciplined, and they don't violate policy anymore. And so, whatever it is that they self-correct, the discipline corrects it, and they go on to be good employees. And then you have some that, have sometimes a pattern of that you have to continue to address.
Which category would Tim James fall in?
He certainly had a pattern of discipline. I don't know what I haven't looked at his concise, but I know he had a couple of cases where we were able to sustain discipline, up into including the one we, obviously arrested him and ultimately terminated him.
Right, Elias Campos. I believe was the victim's name. So what I'm trying to understand then, in selection, you talked about selection. So do you select people that have arrest records?
So it can happen if it's a minor arrest, years ago. It's obviously something that's going to be delved into, a lot of discussion with the candidate about it, but it's unusual for that to happen. So, but it can happen.
And then is there a deselection process? So we've selected, we've trained, JSO,
Correct.
I'm speaking as a taxpayer, let me
Right.
go. JSO is selected, JSO is trained, but you have a problem. What's the deselection process where you remove the bad apples?
So we don't use the term deselection, but obviously terminating employment would be the step there that you would remove them from the agency.
How challenging is that?
So it depends on the phase of employment. So in the probationary phase, there's not a big challenge. They're almost an at-will employee at that point for that first year that they're employed. After that, you've got city civil service protections, which really just requires us to use due process in terminating someone. So those protections are not really unwarranted, so to speak. They're pretty common around the country. But it is a longer process than being an at-will employee.
Okay, Borisade, I think is how they pronounce it. He pronounces it. Was an at-will. Was that probationary?
That is correct.
Okay. By example or by contrast, Tim James was one that was under the contract or the union.
Correct.
Okay. The civil service contract and the union, what do those have to do with each other?
Objection to form. Just a correction, there's no civil service contract.
Okay,
Civil
sorry.
service system and the
Sorry.
union contract.
Right.
Explain to me the dynamic of the civil service protection and the union, if there is one.
So we have a labor contract. The union represents the men and women of JSO. They enter into labor contracts that impact work rules and things like that. That usually happens every 3 years, and pay and benefits, obviously. And it happens about every 3 years. And then the city, as a city employee, the members of JSO have civil service protection. Again, it affords them an opportunity for due process and discipline, suspension, termination, demotion issues, basically. And so there's a couple of routes they can take through our disciplinary process. Many of them end either in arbitration or civil service board, the civilian board, and they kind of evaluate the case and make a recommendation on discipline or termination or whatever the issue is.
Haven't you expressed frustration with that process, with getting rid of the bad apples in press conferences before?
Objection to form. Can we stay off the bad apples?
Yeah, sure. What should I call, what's the best name for officers with repeated challenges? Officers with repeated challenges?
Officers with repeated challenges.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Steve. Mr. Powell.
No, Steve's good.
Okay. Haven't you in press conferences expressed challenges with the civil service protection with regard to regulating JSO? I think that's the question. With the civil service protection and regulating JSO and its reputation.
So I think that on some individual cases I have expressed concern about the decision of the board in a particular case. I think that having the protections of due process, that's going to be a case of termination for an employee is not a bad process. But individual cases sometimes we have had frustrations.
Okay. In referring to the scores video, your quote, and on any of these I'm happy to replay it.
Sure.
But as I recall, your quote is, "It gives me a lot of concern as well."
Sure.
Why?
Initially, the multiple strikes, it would, seeing just that video, I would obviously want to refer that to internal affairs. Again, a lot of analysis needs to be done on video. You need statements from officers. You need all that. That investigation needs to be done, but certainly that will warrant a look.
And the reporters were getting at something, I guess, that's a part of this lawsuit, and it's obviously the same person, former Officer Borisade, struck Miss Martinez at 2 separate incidents hours apart. Fair?
Fair.
What failed? I mean, is there not a safeguard that could have prevented somebody who's already been, subject to a response to resistance that may have been called into question, being subject to a second response to resistance?
Objection to form.
Yeah, rephrase that for me.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand the protocol of somebody who...
Are they removed from a situation because they've already been involved in a response
Right.
to resistance? No, there's not a protocol for that. I think and in this situation, she was taken to the jail, which would be so in terms of the protocol, that was a normal flow of, so he wasn't in an unusual position, let me say.
Okay.
Or shot him.
It's my understanding that the RTR reports, response to resistance reports, are due by the end of shift.
Sure, absolutely.
Why not more promptly?
I think that's a product of work volume. It's a product of other things that have to happen. But as long as we get them in before the officers go home, is the issue.
Okay. It's my understanding that Officer Vickery called to do his, or was talking to his lieutenant about the response to resistance report, and was told, "Don't bother. We already know about it." But the lieutenant was talking about the Sallyport incident, not knowing about the Scores incident that he wanted to report, because Vickery wasn't at the Sallyport.
Correct.
Is there, I mean, I guess I'm trying to understand, is there any protocol or any way the system failed as it is at JSO, the policies and procedures that allow that to happen?
I would say more than failure of a system, maybe obviously the miscommunication between Vickery and his supervisor. But the policy is that not only are we requiring officers who use force to write a report, but those who witness it also write an RTR report as well. So I think that's a sound policy as you address, again, not only the officer using the force, but if you're the officer using the force and I'm there assisting you and I'm the witness to that, I also write a report about what I witnessed in that. And so we're able to use that obviously as part of any review, investigation, or whatever, and document our uses of force in the community. So I would say miscommunication beyond just a failure of process.
Why is it important that officers who witness a response to resistance or use of force are to write a report?
Well, years ago when we began to document uses of force, well before my time as sheriff, and it was under Rutherford, I believe, early in his term. There was a lot of discussion about that, but it's the idea is that we capture all the perspectives from the event. I mean, if you think about it, it's pre-body camera, so you want to get as much perspective as you can, and the best way to do that is to require those officers to document what they saw.
It memorializes events.
Correct.
It documents a significant event. Is that fair?
Sure.
What happens when officers who witness uses of force don't write an RTR report?
Objection to form.
Is there any discipline to an officer that witnesses a use of force that doesn't write a report?
So in policy, you are required to write the required reports, and if you don't do that, then you can be subject to discipline.
Should Officer Vickery have written a report even though his lieutenant told him not to?
I think he should have. Or potentially, obviously, been subject to interview about the incident.
We didn't receive a report from Officer Andres, Officer Smith, or Officer Chastain from the incident at Sallyport. Would they have been in violation of JSO code for not doing the report?
If they had witnessed any, had been witnesses to that, they would have had to and whether it was an RTR report that they would have witnessed, or something else, or maybe just been part of the investigation. So without knowing who saw from what perspective, I couldn't answer that directly.
And, I mean, you know, you said lessons, and I think you said teaching moment, and accountable to the community. Is there, whether in 2016 or 2020, is there accountability coming, or has accountability come from what happened to Mayra Martinez?
I think accountability came the day we arrested Borisade and then ultimately terminated him. I mean, and being the driver for that event. So I would say yes in that sense.
What about the other officers for violation of protocol?
Objection to form.
You can answer.
I have not looked at those summations on those reports. I know there were investigations conducted, but I don't know the outcomes.
Okay. Are you aware if Borisade even made a report?
I'm not.
Okay. Obviously, if he didn't, that would have been a violation as well.
Sure.
Of course, he was terminated.
Correct.
It's our understanding, and in fact, he said it in deposition, that Andres, or it was said about him in deposition, that Andres made a comment to the effect of, the cameras, don't be stupid. Is there any training in JSO Academy or JSO day-to-day on-the-job training that teaches officers to act differently when there are cameras present?
No.
Why not?
So if I understand your question correctly, why do we not teach officers to act differently when there are cameras around?
Yes, sir.
Officers should act the same way whether there's a camera around or not. So that the level of professionalism and, you know, that we expect from them should, you know, on or off camera should be the same.
Do you know any other significance, having been in the PTDF, why Officer Andres would have alerted Officer Borisade of the cameras that were recording him?
I've not heard that.
Okay.
I don't know.
Why was this a black eye for JSO?
Listen, I think
Objection to form.
anytime you have an officer that first of all violates the law to the point he's arrested, it certainly doesn't look good for a law enforcement agency for that to happen.
And I think you said, I think it was Ben Becker, that you think we can overcome it, meaning JSO. Has JSO overcome that black eye?
I think you work every day to overcome, you know, challenges that you have with the community or perceptions even created by something like that. So I think it's an ongoing, everyday effort to make sure you're working on that relationship with the community. So as soon as you take your eye off of it, then you're not overcoming it. But I don't think you ever arrive at the point where, you know, we're good. We've done all we need to do. I think it's a constant work in progress.
And I know you, and I think I know what you meant, but you said perception. It is JSO's use of force. Is that him calling back in? I'll strike that question. Start over. Are you there, Luke? Or Sean?
Luke.
He might be calling back.
Luke, are you there?
It was on line one.
Let me go off the record.
Fair.
Going off at 9:53. We are back on record at 9:59.
We were talking about black eyes, and you said something with the word, or a sentence with the word perception in it. Was this a perception of a black eye or the reality of a black eye for JSO?
No, I was speaking in general terms, but this was not a good day for the agency.
And do you, as sheriff of Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, keep up with officer arrest records?
The number of officers we have arrested?
Correct.
I don't do it specifically, the undersheriff does, but yes, we do monitor
Okay.
that and keep up with it.
Officers who've had their certificate revoked?
So I'm not sure, yes, we have it, but I don't know that.
Where's the line? Oh, there it is. There it is. Luke!
Yes, I just got disconnected, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Well, we took a break to try to find you, and we have just started again, so you have missed nothing.
All right. Sorry for all this confusion. I appreciate your patience with this.
Not at all.
I'm going to go back to that last question so that we can just pretend that never happened.
Sure.
Do you keep track of records of officers who've been arrested?
We do.
Okay. Do you keep track of officers who've had their certificate revoked?
So I believe that makes it back. I know that when we do an internal investigation, the findings of our case, whether the employee is terminated or not, or separated from us or not, or leaves under investigation, is sent to CJSTC for their evaluation. I don't know if that comes back to their file. I couldn't answer that question.
Okay. Do you, as sheriff of Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, keep track of uses of force, RTRs, significant injuries in the civil rights perspective?
We do.
Okay. How is that communicated to you?
So we actually produce a report every year that is an analysis of use of force, somewhat high-level view, statistics, numbers, answering a lot of those things that you just said, people injured, number of uses of force, that type of thing. And so we publish that every year.
Okay. What's that called?
It's the RTR annual report.
Okay. Have you noticed any trends under your administration with arrested officers, officers who've lost their certificate or litigation involving officer conduct?
So in talking to past sheriffs, I know we have arrested more employees as a whole, so corrections, police, and civilian, a small number, than they did in the past. So I don't know what you attribute that to, but we have had an increase in the last 5 years of that.
Do you know if that's a product of more aggressive looking at officers, prosecutors that are prosecuting, or more a decrease in the I guess, or an increase in the illegal conduct by officers?
So I would say it is a very hard look by us at a very young workforce, making sure that we are not only making sure they're following policies and procedures, but when they violate the law, that's addressed appropriately as well. So it's a aggressive stance on our part to make sure we're holding them accountable.
Does a supervisor review their, I guess, the officers under them's communication to periodically to determine if it's appropriate, if they're doing the right thing?
What type of communication?
Particularly, where did most of this come from?
MDC.
The MDC?
MDC.
Yeah, the MDC communication.
Okay, so unless there's a complaint, I don't think there's a random review of officer-to-officer communication, I'm assuming is what you're
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I don't think unless there's a complaint, there's any random review of that.
Who's supposed to write a report?
Objection to form.
So if there's a police report, who's supposed to write the report?
So typically, the officer who's assigned the call is assigned to complete that call, and if it requires a report be written, he should write it. Although sometimes a supervisor can say, hey, you have to go to court, you write the report. So, but typically, the officer assigned the call would write the report unless there's some extenuating circumstances.
Let me take you back to grammar class.
Okay.
First person versus third person. I versus you. Is an officer supposed to write a report in somebody else's perspective? For instance, Borisade writing this as I, but referring to Vickery, or vice versa.
No, I mean only if they're referring to something, maybe a quote or something like that. But no, in terms of person, no, they should write it from their perspective.
Why is that important?
Well, that's part of the documentation process. You want their perspective, especially if you're documenting an incident they were involved in, and not just facts of a report. The idea is that you're getting their perspective. Excuse me.
Thank you.
There were some comments in the MDC and text messages between Borisade and Vickery, and frankly Vickery Superior, such as, wish you were at Scores, you missed out. That girl was a fighter. I know I'm going to feel it in the morning, and ended with a text message that basically said, what, you got it? Good stirring up trouble with you. With Vickery sending Borisade a text message late that night, said, always a pleasure stirring up trouble with you, sir, until next time. I mean, we all say boneheaded things, but are officers supposed to be bragging about stirring up trouble?
Objection to form.
Yeah, and I think you hit it. I mean, you've got two young officers who are, blustering back and forth with each other. That clearly that's not something you want to see, but and I have not seen those messages, so I'm not sure who started and engaged in the conversation. But yeah, I think it's two young guys that probably speaking out of turn a little bit.
What is the early warning system?
So that is a system we have in the agency that tracks a variety of things that would impact an officer. Could be a use of force report, could be a car crash, could be, the officer was maybe formally counseled because he was late to work. So when you have 3 events occur, not in any one category, but just in general, then there's a message sent to his watch commander, his lieutenant, to at least have a quick sit down and touch base with me to make sure that he is, nothing going on in his personal life, nothing, just that he's good. So, and the intent is to obviously engage at the earliest possible.
Does it go further than that? I mean, is it just so that they check in, or is there discipline that results, or notation for file, or anything like that?
There can be. I don't think it's always exactly the same, but there can be. So that discipline would have been handled by each individual event, so to speak. But this is kind of a bigger snapshot of everything that's happening.
Why is that important?
I think it's just that. It's an early intervention. If you've got an opportunity to intervene, maybe someone's having a personal issue or, substance abuse issue, maybe, whatever it may be, there's an opportunity to detect that before, it damages their career or causes an issue.
The Times Union, I'm not here to quote the Times Union, but I want to see if their quote is correct, or if I just want to see if it's correct. But the Times Union called it or said it was a system designed to notify senior officers of potential problems with those under their command, such as reports of excessive force or racial bias. Is that accurate?
No, I wouldn't think that's accurate.
Okay.
That's,
What's inaccurate about it?
so I think if you, any report of excessive force would show up long before would be investigated prior to it being part of the early warning system. Same with the bias. I think you could have a complaint beyond the early warning system that may, would trigger an investigation, so to speak. You don't wait on the early warning system to identify those things.
Are there so like RTR reports? Are there reports for bias or for somebody says a trigger word, the N word is what commonly people think of. Is there a system for reporting that?
So that would be a complaint, on the officer, and then that would be the normal complaint process. If someone calls and says I was called the N word by the officer, then obviously that would trigger an investigation into that particular incident.
What does JSO do with those complaints?
Investigate them. So they're assigned to internal affairs. They're given an internal affairs number, and then sometimes, depending on the ultimate severity of the discipline, it may go back to that chain of command. So it may be the lieutenant who investigates that, or it may stay with internal affairs and be assigned to an internal affairs investigator to follow up the case. And that's done because of the volume. Because we investigate every complaint it comes in at some level.
Okay.
John, may I ask if you're going to continue this line of questioning for much longer? Because I understand that you have broad latitude here, but I would ask that you connect it up to this case.
Certainly.
To show some relevance to this line of questioning.
Certainly, it's all a part of our Monell claim.
Well, you still have to connect it up to this case, and so I would ask that in the question of the sheriff,
sure.
Because this line of questioning could go on all day if you want to ask every aspect of the agency.
It won't, and my intention is to be done well before lunch, like done.
I'm happy, and the sheriff is happy for you to ask all the questions you want that pertain to this lawsuit. And I'm simply asking that you make the relevance of some of these questions a little clearer.
Fair enough. Sheriff, is the early warning system that we discussed is that what's the intent of that?
Again, I think it's the early intervention. If you see, small issues arise that you've got that maybe could have been missed because different people see, the officer at different times. But if you're capturing that information and you do see a car crash 2 times late for work and a formal counseling for something else, it gives you an opportunity as a first or second line supervisor to pull the officer in and just have a conversation with him. And it may uncover something that obviously you can intervene in.
Sheriff, I'm going to attach as Plaintiff's Exhibit 1 to this deposition a copy of a letter that seems to be signed by you. Did you sign this letter?
I did.
What is this?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Feel free to review it, please.
So this was a letter written to the mother, I believe, of an individual who was shot by an officer named Jeff Edwards.
Okay. Is Jeff Edwards still employed with JSO?
He is not.
And what was your involvement with that case?
So I was the agency rep for, I believe, I don't know if it was the civil case, but one part of the case, again, the disciplinary case, I believe, on Edwards.
Okay. But
So I
you si-
represented the agency on that.
Okay, but you signed it as sheriff?
This was long, that was way prior to.
Okay.
The incident occurred when I was a director, I believe. And this is part of, I believe, a settlement.
Did you write this letter?
With assistance, I'm sure.
Okay. In the Davinian Williams case, this case, what was the significance of the early warning system?
I don't recall.
Okay.
I'm assuming it's in the letter. If you'd like, I'll read it if you'd like.
That's all right. The letter addresses a chronology of changes that JSO had made as a result of a teaching moment.
Sure.
And what I'm wondering is there a chronology of changes that have resulted out of this incident involving Mayra Martinez?
Not to this extent, I would say. But again, I think that behavior was, the best teaching moment was possibly the arrest and termination of Borisade, beyond anything else, to establish that, obviously this, again, I think 99% of the officers may not have needed that, visual to understand that. But if anybody needed to, there was a good one there for that.
Why wasn't Tim James terminated?
Objection to form.
He was.
His record indicates he resigned.
He may have resigned prior to being terminated.
Okay.
I don't know the outcome of that, though, so.
Fair enough. And one of the reasons I keep bringing up Tim James is Borisade testified, according to my recollection, that he ran into Tim James a lot at the academy and would see him around and heard and saw of his bravado, including some of the similar comments to what he made in the Facebook posts. And what I'm trying to understand is, we've looked at the differences and similarities of the two, and Tim James had civil service protections. Borisade did not. Tim James had multiple incidents. Borisade had one. And I'm just trying to understand that, and you've made it clear, the message sent, the example was made out of Borisade, but why wasn't the example made from Tim James when he was posting comments like, not in a good mood, everyone might want to watch what they do or say around me, about to go off like a grenade, or be polite, be professional, and have a plan to kill everyone you meet, or if you ask me if you can go this way, I'm going to drag your ass out of the car through your window and monkey stomp you, or JSO dirty duds done dirt cheap, or yep, it's that kind of night, someone's getting a size 13 boot to the ass tonight, I can feel it, or final one, it's a bolio kind of night, someone just learned a hard lesson about not showing your ass in Jacksonville, 3 felonies, 2 misdemeanors, and an ass whooping to boot, LOL, means lots of laughs, I love my job. So why was Borisade made an example of and not Tim James?
So I think we disciplined Tim James at the appropriate level based on those comments. And the difference in events, this may have been Borisade's first event, but it was egregious to the point that he violated the law. So Tim James obviously was violating policy, and that was addressed appropriately. And ultimately, he did commit an act that was a violation of law and was arrested. And ultimately, we were moving determination that he may have resigned during. I can't recall.
Okay. I mean, in looking at Tim James' record, I understand you don't have it.
Sure.
You know, we've indicated, we have notes of a April 15 Amanda Jean Gates incident that sounds a lot like what happened to Mayra Martinez. A repeated failure to avoid going to the academy despite being told not to. Citations for failure to obey an order and failure to be wholly candid in November of 2015. There's the Daniel Nyman incident, which received a lot of media coverage. There's another one that Mitch Stone is representing, John Blessing, where Tim James injured his arm, and on. And ultimately, Tim James resigned and you know, it didn't have an example made out of him. And I just, if we're talking about examples being made, I just don't understand it.
Objection to form.
Can you help me understand it?
So I'll try. So each one of those cases where there was a sustained violation, I think we responded to appropriately, up into including the case where he was arrested. And once arrested, the state has to make their determination of whether or not they're going to pursue charges. And then after that's complete, we can pursue our policy violation investigation, if you will, moving to, in this case, up to termination. Anybody can quit any job anytime they want. So, technically no officer has to wait around to be fired. But knowing it's coming, they can push the envelope, work the system as much as they, to buy time, and then ultimately just leave when they get ready. And in James's case, that may have happened. But I think the incident that occurred where he was arrested and then ultimately we're moving towards termination, I think is a similar example.
He was arrested June of 2017, was put in, what's it called? Phone duty?
Teleserve.
Teleserve. Was put in teleserve and he resigned July of 18. So 11 months he remained as a JSO employee. But that's the same as Borisade?
No, that's not the same as Borisade. Borisade was, again, remember, was an at-will employee. So all the protections that protections and due process, so to speak, that James was utilizing. And I don't know what processes he used. It could have been, you've got disciplinary hearing, you push it to civil service, and there's obviously deadlines and timetables in there. So that doesn't sound out of the realm of possibility to me. But again, Borisade didn't have those same protections or opportunities to do that. So being an at-will employee, as soon as we made the determination that like we did with Tim James, we're going to move to terminate you. We could terminate Borisade. There's a whole process to go through with an employee that has those civil service protections.
I'm not going to use the term bad apples, but doesn't that keep officers with disciplinary issues and illegal behavior on the force?
Well, I think you could say for a period of time until we work through the process. And look, everybody should be afforded some kind of due process. But obviously they're not in contact with the public. And sometimes it may be better. Sometimes I wish you could. But you got to work through the process. And so taking 7 months, 8 months sometimes is not uncommon, for those deadlines and things to occur as they prepare to defend themselves in these cases, and then use the board and some of these disciplinary processes to, to be reviewed or to have their, case heard, basically.
Did anybody not look at Tim James's history, his threats to the public, his actions of violence on the public, and not try to get rid of him at any point?
Objection to form.
I think each one of those cases was looked at that way.
Okay. But the civil service protection
Well, ultimately, when it came to that final, that would be the 11 months in teleserve would be the process by which he was again defending himself, attempting to keep his job, even though we were making the case to terminate him. And again, I don't remember that he left prior to termination, but maybe seeing the writing on the wall, he chose to leave, and that happens sometimes.
I think he left as part of the state attorney's deal that he
Okay.
had to give up his certificate.
Yeah, I don't remember the outcome.
Do you know if Clay Short is still with the agency?
Clay Short is still with the agency.
Were you aware of the comments attributed to him in the Ladavinian Williams case where he said, I'm told Officer Edwards, I'm glad you shot that inward?
Objection to form.
I don't recall that.
Okay. Does JSO have a tolerance policy for uses of threats against the public and uses of the N-word?
No. You mean a tolerance policy? Explain that.
Yeah, is it
Is it tolerated to a certain extent?
Yes.
No, absolutely not.
so how is it not tolerated? I mean, at what point, so it has to come to a complaint and then go before the Civil Service Board and they've got to make a determination?
No. So if you had a complaint, again, someone made the complaint that, hey, the officer, called me the N-word. So that would be a complaint that was investigated. We would have to be able to sustain that with proof that it occurred, and then we could take action. So the actual complaint in and of itself may not lead to any discipline. Again, we've got to open the investigation, prove that it occurred, and then we could take the appropriate action.
And that's investigated by JSO
Correct.
internally?
Internal affairs.
Okay. So in that sense, it would matter whether or not they were on camera.
It would
Objection
matter
to
whether or
form.
not they were on camera.
Yeah, if they had misconduct on camera, it would matter because the conduct would likely be sustained.
It was-
Objection to form. What's the foundation for that, John?
We talked about the cameras.
Misconduct on camera likely to be sustained. I mean, there's an evaluation of every incident. Just because something is on doesn't make it misconduct.
When an agent,
That's how
it's a
you framed
separate
your
conversation. Yeah. I mean, it's a longer conversation, but I'll re-ask it. Thank you. We talked earlier about the cameras, and an officer's supposed to do whatever they do, regardless of cameras.
Right.
And now I've added additional facts that JSO investigates JSO officer misconduct.
Right.
And whether or not that misconduct is on camera or not will affect the finding of whether that officer committed a violation or not.
It is certainly a piece of evidence that we could use in that investigation.
Okay. So you don't know what who was it? Who was it that said the cameras? Andres. You don't know what Andres meant. Okay. That's a no.
I do not.
Thank you. As the ultimate leader of Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, do you want to see officers who commit crimes investigated?
Absolutely.
No question.
No question.
Do you want to see officers who commit crimes terminated?
Absolutely.
No question.
No question.
You don't want anybody with a criminal record working for Jacksonville Sheriff's Office?
So two parts there. The criminal record piece, as we talked about earlier, in selection, if you are arrested at 19 for a DUI in college, and you're 25, and you've had and that's typically the type of case we see, they may very well get selected. So that type of criminal record is not what you're talking about, I'm assuming. But if you violate the law as a police officer, yes.
Okay. From what you saw in the video of Mayra Martinez at Scores, do you have an opinion as to whether her civil and constitutional rights were violated? You can answer.
That video clearly warrants an investigation, and that's what I would say. I would think that clearly we need to have deeper investigation into that video.
At the PTDF, as the sheriff of Jacksonville,
Right.
Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, do you have an opinion as to whether Mayra Martinez's civil or constitutional rights were violated?
So in that video, clearly, initially what I saw appeared to be a violation of law, and was investigated, and that was found to be the case. So the officer clearly violated the law in that case and was arrested for it.
Officer Borisade testified that he did what he was trained to do at all times. Do you have any facts or evidence to dispute that?
I think you can look at our training protocol and the policy, and the one specific that I would point to is you can use the amount of force necessary to overcome resistance, and I think he overdid that in that case. So in terms of training, I would disagree with this statement.
Because the force was excessive.
Correct.
And he claims he was kicked in the testicles, and he just needed to prevent it from happening again. In that instance, is it a subjective or an objective standard?
Objection to form.
So the only force over to use come resistance. Well, it can be. I think from a hindsight standpoint, obviously we know more than he did at the time, but I would say not from his perspective. He knew what he had to do to overcome the resistance, and again, he doesn't have to make the perfect decision, but he's got to make a reasonable decision. And in my opinion, that wasn't a reasonable reaction.
Okay. There's another component to this, and I didn't show it in the video. The video goes on and on and on. Do you remember if you saw the whole video up until the time paramedics arrived and all that? Okay, you don't think you have?
I have not. I know I have.
I am not going to spend 45 minutes of your valued time to go through it. But ultimately, Miss Martinez slumps. I think you saw that part. And at some point in time, paramedics come. There was Officer Borisade, and I think other officers indicated to paramedics and others that she was faking it. Is that a part of JSO's policy and procedure to determine whether somebody is faking an injury or not?
So, no, it's not. Certainly they have the ability to say that to rescue personnel, but they don't impact rescue's operation there. So the medical professionals will still make their own assessment of that. Okay. But no.
And we'd expect the evidence to show in this case that, in fact, Borisade refused medical treatment for Mayra Martinez against medical advice by the EMTs. Is that a discretionary thing as taught by JSO?
It is not.
Okay. Why not?
Well, we're not medical professionals, and they are. So we clearly defer to their, expertise in that area.
You're not social workers either, are you?
We're not.
What are you?
Objection to form. Really, John, what is the question? Is the
What-
question, what is JSO?
What's the role of a sheriff's officer?
Big picture, the peacekeepers in the community.
Okay. As sheriff, I've seen this letter, and you know,
Is this going to be an exhibit, by the way?
it
You
already
haven't
is.
attached it?
Plaintiff's one.
Okay, thank you. Is
Uh,
it one?
Plaintiff's one, yes, sir. There's certainly, in the first sentence, condolences expressed for a mother who lost a son. Are there condolences to be expressed to Mayra Martinez for what happened here, from Jacksonville Sheriff's Office perspective?
Listen, I think even someone who is, subject to arrest should be treated with a certain amount of respect. And it's been my opinion and my experience as a police officer that goes a long way with being able to do your job effectively. And so I would say in this case, I don't think that she didn't deserve what she got, the treatment she received from Borisade. She did deserve that. She certainly deserved to be arrested. But again, I think that was excessive.
What did she deserve to be arrested for?
The trespassing charge, that type of thing, and then But again, the treatment at the back door was excessive, and certainly something that we would not want to see happen.
What's the standard for an arrest under trespass?
The standard for an arrest under trespass
What's the protocol? What has to happen?
could be as simple as violating the officer's order to leave the property. So then it's a resistance, resisting without violence charge.
Do you know anything
Could be
about the facts about where they told her to go or what property she was
I do
told to
not.
leave? Okay.
I do not.
Questions? Is it your opinion that Borisade failed to follow his training?
At what location?
Or do you know? At either location.
He acted outside of his training at the jail, for sure.
Okay. In what way?
Excessive, being excessive with the force used.
There's been some back and forth throughout the history of this case about whether a JSO officer is allowed or trained to punch a handcuffed inmate. Some say no, some say yes. You're the sheriff. What's the answer?
So handcuffed subject, I would say, not necessarily inmate in the
Yes,
jail,
fair,
but handcuffed
fair.
subject. So again, it depends. If you're talking about a 100-pound female intoxicated, with a male officer, maybe not. If you're talking about a 250-pound male and a female officer, and he's handcuffed and attempting to fight, there's so many variables in this. But again, the officer's got to be able to justify their response to that resistance and their use of force. So, there's not an absolute answer to that. But again, whatever happens, the officer's got to be able to justify that use of force or response to resistance.
Okay. I ask generally about settlement of civil suits, particularly civil rights suits. In the last 5 years, my understanding is that the highest settlement has been about $210,000. The Davinian Williams case was well more than $1 million. Do you know why?
I do not.
Do you know if this letter, the letter, Plaintiff's Exhibit 1, the letter in front of you, was a part of the negotiation?
It may have been, but I can't say for sure.
As part of a negotiation, Plaintiff Mayra Martinez will settle this case for $92,500 if you apologize to her.
I can't speak to the amount, but certainly we apologize for obviously her being treated the way she was at the facility. No doubt about it.
Thank you. Let's take a break, and we're wrapping up. But let me take a break.
Sure.
Record at 10:39. Okay, we are back on the record at 11:07.
Plaintiff has no further questions. Thank you, Sheriff.
Yes, sir.
John, in line with our off-record discussions, Sheriff, let me just ask one question. We've spent a couple hours this morning essentially Q&A about the overall operations of JSO, apart from the particulars of this case.
Sure.
And you've talked about the agency's attention to selection and training, supervision and discipline in a nutshell. Are there any aspects of those elements of the agency that you would like to add to your testimony to more or less, in summary, complete your what you would give as an explanation if you were asked to answer the question about, well, what else or what all does JSO do when it comes to officer training and supervision, for example?
So one of the things I didn't elaborate on that more that I should have is the field training program. So that's a 3-month training program where the officers are actually, evaluated daily on their performance, and we many times can get to the end of that process, and during the process, officers are rolled back. It's a phased process, so you have to be able to complete a certain amount of the work in phase 1, an additional amount in phase 2. Up until including doing all the work and just being observed by your training officer. And there are, numerous times that recruits will be phased back. They don't complete the phase, appropriately. They don't do the things they need to do to move to the next phase. That's common. It happens, and sometimes even at the end of the process, they just don't complete the training program. And there's a heavy investment at that point, but we put enough of an emphasis on obviously being able to put a police officer on the street that can function and we know can respond to training, to be in service of the community. And when they get through the process and that doesn't happen, we do, many times separate the employee at that point from the agency.
Before that officer, before she or he moves on to
being a solo officer,
and that the phase after FTO, if I'm correct, is the probation year, correct?
Correct.
And so when you refer to an officer being on probation, it's not how a layperson might think about, probation is a bad thing. In other words, you've done something bad and you've got to be on probation for it. In this case, a probationary employee in JSO's circumstance is an officer who is now in his or her first year of work on patrol as an officer in his or her own car, taking care of business on their own, correct?
That is correct.
And so in that first year of probation, an officer is essentially, you referred to at will earlier,
correct,
is at will in the sense that that officer has no civil service protection, no union protection, is completely at will, and if that officer performs in a manner that is judged to be not to the standards of the agency, they can be terminated without any question or appeal, correct?
That is correct.
All right. Back to the FTO thing, you mentioned the daily review. Is that a daily written log that's made?
It's a daily observation report. So that field training officer is evaluating, the report writing skills, the officer safety, the radio communications, the interaction with the community. It's evaluating that every day and documenting that on a report. To be obviously as part of the recruit's record.
And that is the last intensive eyes-on period of training that an officer receives at JSO before she or he moves on to working on the street, correct?
Right, that completes like the basic law enforcement training at that point, correct?
Any other thoughts on the FTO program that you want to share?
No, that about covers it.
It's my understanding, it's been my experience, that during your administration, your agency has also established, I think you used the word stand up, you stood up or have stood up, a new unit called the Professional Oversight Unit.
Correct.
Could you explain, for just to complete the story here today, what the Professional Oversight Unit is, what it does, and why it matters to the agency?
So we decided to take a lot of the oversight activity and put that in one chain of command, so that we have one area where you've got internal affairs, not only oversight but transparency. You've got obviously public information, you've got public records, all of that, and under again that one chain of command, so everybody sees that activity. There's an ability for the leadership to have a view of cases that would maybe typically be in silos and on the part of the agency. POU can actually, have oversight of those cases and be able to evaluate from a trend standpoint things that may be happening in the agency, and then they can address that. They bring those concerns to the undersheriff. We see this or we see that in terms of an evaluation of multiple cases that have occurred. It just gives another layer of oversight to maybe the direction of the agency, whereas in years past those things may have been siloed and you may not have been able to pick that up and see that. So it gives us an ability not only through the disciplinary process but through our audit process as well. A lot of the internal audit things we have are in policy is all under professional oversight.
And just a last small question about the POU. Isn't it the case that in the operation of the POU, an officer and not a patrol officer at lieutenant level reviews every single response to resistance report that is written in the agency to as a added layer of review to keep an eye out for issues and trends that may need to be addressed by your administration?
That is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. I appreciate the opportunity to complete the record.
Thank you. On that last note of that last question, do you as sheriff of Jacksonville Sheriff's Office agree to continue using what happened to Mayra Martinez to teach officers to avoid violations of civil and constitutional rights?
Absolutely.
Do you have anything else to add, Sheriff?
So, I will take the opportunity to apologize to Ms. Martinez for the way she was, treated at the back door of the jail. In my view, it was inappropriate, it was excessive, and, again, an apology for that to her, and, we wish her well.
Thank you, sir.
That concludes this deposition. It is 11:15.